The German Shepherd broke formation, without warning. 1 second he was heeled at his handler's left side, moving through the cramped pawn shop in perfect discipline. The next he was sitting completely still, ears forward, dark eyes locked on the young woman at the counter. Not growling. Not alert to threat. Just sitting, the way trained dogs sit when they've found something their handler needs to know about. The woman didn't notice at first. She was too busy unfolding a piece of velvet on the scratched glass counter, hands moving with the careful, deliberate slowness of someone doing something they couldn't afford to think too hard about. Inside the velvet metals, military, still polished. The kind of polished that doesn't happen by accident. The handler tall, close-cropped, the kind of stillness in him that only comes from years of controlled environments, stepped forward and read the engraving on the top metal before she could fold it back. Staff Sergeant Lena Marsh, 8th Medical Brigade. He stopped breathing for exactly 2 seconds. The dog hadn't moved. If you've made it this far, don't go anywhere. Stay until the end. This story is going to go somewhere you won't expect. Hit like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The pawn shop was called Delmar's, wedged between a dry cleaner and a tax office on the east side of Carver City, and it smelled like dust and old electronics. And the particular kind of quiet that descends on places where people come to trade the things they didn't want to give up. Lena Marsh had been standing at that counter for 4 minutes before the dog sat down beside her. She was 29, though the tiredness around her eyes read older. She was wearing scrubs, dark navy, the kind that didn't show stains, and her hair was pulled back in the way that said she either just finished a shift or was about to start one. The man behind the counter, a heavy-set guy named Delmar, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, had already examined the metals once and quoted her a price that made her jaw tighten. "I can do 400 for the set," he'd said. Military stuff moves slow these days. She'd asked if he could do 5. He said he could do 425. She was staring at the metals, not at him, when the dog appeared at her left side and sat down. Lena looked at the dog the way most people look at unexpected animals, with the particular wariness of someone who doesn't know if it bites. Then she looked up at the handler, who was already looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Something between recognition and careful restraint. "Sorry," the handler said. "He doesn't usually do that." "Do what?" "Sit like that, without a command." Lena looked down at the dog again. The dog looked back at her with complete, unblinking steadiness. She'd seen that look before in the field, in the particular eyes of animals, trained to distinguish between the scent of sweat and the scent of blood. This dog wasn't afraid of her. He was deciding something about her. "What's his name?" she asked. "Kodiak." She looked at the handler properly for the first time. He was maybe 34, built the way men are built when physical fitness has been a professional requirement for a long time. Not gym-built, work-built. He had a scar that ran along the left side of his jaw, faded to white pink, and his eyes were the specific shade of measured that told her military without the need for a uniform. He was reading the engraving on her metal. She watched his face change. 8th Medical Brigade, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a long time ago. Staff Sergeant Marsh. He said her name like he was checking a mental file. Lena Marsh. The temperature in the room dropped 2 degrees, or at least it felt that way. "Do I know you?" she said. "No," he paused. "But I know your name." "My name's Bram Calloway. I was with Naval Special Operations 3rd Team, Pendler Group." He extended his hand. "And I think someone lied about what happened to you." Delmar behind the counter had found something extremely interesting to look at on his phone. Lena did not take the offered hand immediately. She folded the velvet back over the metals with careful, practiced movements. "I don't know what you think you know," she said, "but I'm just trying to sell some things." "I know," Bram said. "That's what worries me." She didn't leave with him that day. She left with the metals still in her pocket and $425 she hadn't taken either, because when it came to the actual moment of signing over the case, something in her chest had locked up and she'd said never mind and walked out while Delmar was still mid-sentence. Bram Calloway was standing outside on the sidewalk, not blocking her, just standing there, Kodiak sitting at heel, both of them patient in the way that suggested they had time. "I'm not interested in whatever this is," Lena said. "I figured you'd say that. Then why are you still standing here?" He reached into his jacket pocket and held out a card. Not a business card, a folded piece of paper, handwritten. "That's a name. You can look it up yourself, privately, when you want to. No pressure." He looked at her steadily. "But I've seen 3 other service members in the past 18 months with names that connect to the same operation. All of them had their records touched. 2 of them lost their careers inside a year of starting to ask questions." Lena looked at the folded paper but didn't take it. I'm a nurse, she said. I work at Halverton Regional. I have a 12-hour shift tonight, and I have to get back. I know, something cold moved through her. You looked me up. I recognized your name from a briefing document I wasn't supposed to see 4 years ago. He held her gaze. Someone flagged you, Sergeant, not as a threat, as a liability. There's a difference, and it matters. The paper was still in his hand. She took it. Halverton Regional Medical Center sat on the north edge of Carver City like an afterthought, a mid-size hospital that served a mid-size population and operated on the particular institutional logic of every underfunded regional facility, stretched thin, staffed by people working longer than was safe, administration convinced that data on paper bore some meaningful relationship to reality on the floor. Lena had worked there for 14 months. She had come in with spotless clinical credentials, a nursing license issued by the state board without complications, and a work history that showed 4 years in civilian healthcare following a military discharge she had described in her interview reasons. Personal circumstances. The hiring manager had not pressed. The hospital needed night shift nurses badly enough that pressing felt counterproductive. She had made herself exactly useful enough not to be noticed, and nothing more. This was by design. She clocked in at 6:47 p.m., changed in the locker room, and picked up her patient assignments from the board before the charge nurse had finished updating it. A small efficiency that was habit, not ambition. Her assignment that night was the medical surgical floor. 12 patients, moderate to high acuity. 2 of them flagged for close monitoring. The floor smelled like industrial cleaner and the particular staleness of recycled air. Fluorescence lights buzzed at a frequency that, after enough hours, stopped registering consciously and started living somewhere in the base of the skull. Lena had learned to stop hearing it after the first month. She began her rounds. The patient in room 14 was a 43-year-old man named Gerald Odom, who had come in that afternoon through the ER with what the intake physician had documented as a kidney stone. Classic presentation on the surface: severe flank pain, nausea, elevated heart rate. The ear doc had ordered a CT urogram and called it. Gerald had been moved upstairs for pain management and discharge prep, pending imaging results. Lena introduced herself, did her initial assessment, checked his vitals from the most recent reading. Heart rate 112, blood pressure 94/61. She looked at the numbers, then at Gerald, then at the numbers again. He was gray in a way that kidney stones didn't produce. His pain description had migrated since intake. He was pressing his hand to his abdomen now, not his flank. He was sweating with a particular quality she recognized, fine and cold and everywhere at once. She asked him to describe the pain. He said it was different than before, deeper, like something was wrong inside, not on the outside. His words, not hers. She stepped out and flagged Dr. Cassian, the attending on overnight call, a young doctor, 3 years out of residency, the kind of confident that doesn't always look before stepping. His pressure's low and he's diaphoretic, Lena said. Pain's migrating. I want to call for an urgent surgical consult. Dr. Cassian looked at the chart on his tablet. It's a kidney stone with associated GI symptoms. He's getting pain management. CT's pending. I think his presentation is changing. Lena, the workup is in process. I'd like the surgical team aware while the CT's running. He looked at her with the particular impatience of someone who has been interrupted from something else. I appreciate your concern. Let the imaging come back first. She went back to room 14. Gerald Odom was worse. His pressure had dropped to 89 systolic. His skin had gone from gray to a waxy, clammy pallor. He told her the pain was going into his back now, both sides, and he felt like something was his word tearing. Lena Marsh had spent 14 months being exactly unremarkable. She had spent that time keeping her head down, doing her work, staying off every radar she could identify. She pulled the emergency response cord at 8:32 p.m. and did not wait for permission. What happened next was the kind of medical emergency that separates hospitals into 2 categories: the ones with staff who know what they're looking at and move, and the ones where everyone waits for someone else to decide. Halverton Regional, at 8:32 p.m. on a Tuesday in November, turned out to be the former because the surgical attending on call that night, a compact, gray-haired woman named Dr. Petra Schull, had been doing this for 22 years and walked into room 14:40 seconds after the call went out and looked at Gerald Odom for approximately 6 seconds. Get me a vascular surgeon now. She turned to Lena without breaking stride. What's his pressure? 87/58. Dropped 4 points in the last 12 minutes. You recognize this? Doctor. Schull said it the way experienced clinicians ask, not testing, assessing. Dissecting AAA, Lena said, or close enough that it doesn't matter which. Schull looked at her for 1 sharp second. Then she moved. Gerald Odom was in surgery 40 minutes later. The vascular team would determine it was a contained aortic dissection, contained being the relevant word, meaning caught before rupture, meaning the difference between a man who lived and a man whose family got a call in the middle of the night. He lived. The surgical team gave Lena exactly 0 credit in the official documentation. The R chart had been updated to reflect clinical correlation and doctor. Cashian's name was on the order for urgent surgical consult, which he had technically approved approximately 90 seconds before the emergency response cord was pulled. On paper, the system had worked correctly. Dr. Schull stopped by the nursing station at 11:15 p.m. "You caught that," she said quietly. "Not a question. I raise concerns. Don't be modest. You caught it, and you called it when someone told you not to." Schull looked at her with the flat, clear look of a person who has been in medicine long enough to have no patience for euphemism. "Where did you do your training? State program," Lena said. "Before nursing, I was in the Army." "What did you do in the Army?" "Medical." Schull studied her for a moment that stretched slightly past comfortable. "You're wasted on nights," she said, and walked away. The next morning, Lena slept 4 hours, then made the mistake of opening the folded paper Bram Calloway had given her. The name on it was Colonel Frederick Prade, Inspector General's office. Retired. She looked it up, public records, nothing specialized. Frederick Prade had been an Inspector General investigator for 11 years, retiring in 2019. His public record was unremarkable. One piece, buried in a regional news archive from 2018, a brief mention of his name in connection with an inquiry into a military operational review, closed without findings. The operation's name was redacted in the article. The operation's date was not. September 2016. Lena sat very still for a long moment. Then she got up, went to the closet in her studio apartment. She had not been able to afford anything larger on a Halverton regional salary, and pulled down a storage box from the top shelf. It was coated in a fine layer of dust she had not allowed herself to disturb in 14 months. She set it on the bed and looked at it. Didn't open it. Not yet. She put it back and went to make coffee. 3 days later, hospital administrator Maren Voss called her into the administrative suite on the 3rd floor, which was where patients were not allowed, and where the light was somehow both better and colder than the rest of the building. Maren Voss was 51, impeccably dressed, and had the particular manner of administrators who had learned to deliver bad news with a warm smile and eye contact designed to communicate competent concern. She had a printout in front of her that she did not lead with. "Lena, I want to have an open conversation with you," Maren began. "We've been reviewing some records as part of a routine compliance audit, and there are a few items that need clarification." Lena sat across from her and said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that silence was more useful than filling it. "There are some gaps in your employment history and some questions about your licensing documentation that HR has flagged," Maren continued. "Nothing that can't be resolved through the proper process, of course. But for the time being, the hospital's position is that you'll need to go on administrative leave while we complete the review." "What gaps?" Lena said. "There are some discrepancies between the records you submitted and what the state licensing board has on file." "That's not possible." "I understand this is upsetting." I said, "That's not possible." Lena kept her voice level, but the temperature in it had changed. "I submitted the correct documentation. My license is current and clean. There are no discrepancies in my record." Maren looked at her with the patient, contained expression of someone who has decided on a course of action before sitting down. "I'm sure it will all be resolved quickly. In the meantime, this is administrative leave. Precautionary. With pay?" A half-second pause. "Without pay," Lena said. Maren did not correct her. Lena stood up. She was careful about it. She pushed the chair back slowly, stood fully, picked up her bag from the floor. Everything measured. Nothing abrupt. She looked at Maren Voss across the desk and did not say the 17 things she could have said, and the restraint of that was its own particular form of weight. "I'd like a written copy of the specific discrepancy cited," she said, "and the name of the person at the licensing board who flagged them." "We'll have documentation to you within today," Lena said. "I'll wait." She was sitting in her car in the hospital parking garage when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Marsh, the voice was male, low modulated. Not aggressive, careful. The careful of someone who had rehearsed. "Who is this?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you understand the situation you're walking into." Lena looked through the windshield at the concrete pillar, 3 feet in front of her car. "Go ahead. You saved a patient last week." "That's visible." "You're visible. That was a mistake. I'm going to need you to be more specific. Stop asking questions about your discharge. Stop following the threads you've started following." You're not the first person to think they could unravel this, and the others didn't come out ahead. A pause that had something else in it, something close to the clinical detachment of someone relaying information rather than making a threat. This is the one warning. Take it seriously. The line went dead. Lena sat with the phone in her hand for 30 seconds. She was aware of her own heartbeat, not racing, just present, the way it went during certain specific situations she had trained for and hoped not to use again. She was aware of the weight of the storage box on the shelf at home, still dusty, still sealed. She thought about Gerald Odom, who had a family and was going home from the hospital in 2 days. She thought about a night in September 2016, in a landscape that smelled like diesel and dry rock, where she had made a decision that 10 people came home because of, and she had never been able to say so publicly. She put the car in reverse and drove out of the parking garage. Bram Calloway was at a diner on South Halver Street when she walked in and sat across from him without being invited. Kodiak was under the table. He raised his head when she sat down, looked at her steadily, then put his head back on his paws. "You said 6 people," Lena said. "When you stopped me outside the pawn shop, you said 3 others, then you said 6. Bram wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. "6 that I've confirmed. There may be more. What connects them? All served between 2015 and 2019. All had some connection to operations in the Karvesh corridor. All of them questioned something at some point, a decision, a command call, an order that didn't make operational sense. All of them had career problems within 18 months. 3 lost their discharges. 2 had licensing or credential problems in civilian careers. You're the second nurse, actually. One's a paramedic." Lena absorbed this without outward reaction. "Who's running the investigation right now?" "Nobody official. I've been doing this on my own time." He looked at her directly. "Colonel prayed the name I gave you. He was building a case before he retired. He handed off what he had to a current IG investigator named Theo Merritt. Merritt has been very quiet about it publicly. Too quiet, which means he's either buried it or he's protecting it." "I got a call today," Lena said. "Anonymous, told me to stop." Something shifted in Bram's expression. After the suspension. "Yes, that's faster than the others." He set down the mug. "They're watching closer. That means either someone thinks you're closer to something, or someone already knows what's in my records," Lena said. Bram looked at her. "I have documentation," she said quietly. "From 2016. I kept it. Everything the original order, the counter order I issued, the communication logs from my team, photographs. I have it in a box in my apartment. I haven't touched it in 14 months, because touching it means starting something I couldn't finish alone." The diner hummed around them. Plates scraped. Someone laughed at the counter. The ordinary world, continuing its ordinary business. "You're not alone anymore," Bram said. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then at the dog under the table, who had raised his head again, and was looking at her with those same steady eyes from the pawn shop. Not demanding, not performing, just present. "I need to know something," she said, "before this goes anywhere. I need to know why a Naval Special Operations handler recognizes a name from a military brigade medical report and goes to the trouble of tracking down a night shift nurse. Because the route order that almost got your team killed in September 2016 was the same route order that a Special Operations unit used 3 weeks later," Bram said. "And 2 men from my team died on it." The diner hummed. Lena's hands were still on the table. "Nobody connected those 2 events in any official report," Bram continued. "Your incident was documented as a disciplinary matter. Ours was documented as enemy contact under adverse conditions. 2 separate files, 2 separate chains of command, never cross-referenced." His jaw tightened. "I've been cross-referencing them for 2 years." Outside the diner window, the afternoon traffic on South Halver Street moved past in the gray November light. Cars, buses, and people on sidewalks doing the ordinary work of an ordinary day in Carver City. Lena thought about the box in her apartment, the dust on the lid. 14 months of not touching it, because opening it meant deciding something she hadn't been ready to decide. She thought about the call this morning, the measured voice, and the careful rehearsed warning. The timing of it right after the suspension, right after she'd caught something. Someone didn't want caught, in a room where she was supposed to be invisible. She thought about Gerald Odom pressing his hand to his abdomen and saying it felt like something was tearing. Some things, once you've seen them, you can't unfeel. "Tell me everything you have," she said. "And I'll tell you everything I have, and then we figure out what comes next." Kodiak put his chin on her knee under the table. Outside, the light shifted, and the afternoon began its slow collapse into dark, and somewhere in Carver City, in a building that made decisions without names attached, someone who had made a phone call that morning, was waiting to see if it had worked. It hadn't. They didn't go back to her apartment that night. Bram said it was too exposed, not paranoia, just operational sense, the kind that kept people from making mistakes they couldn't walk back. He had a contact, a former logistics officer named Darnell Ruiz, who now ran a small private security consulting firm out of a converted warehouse near the Carver City rail yards. Darnell had space, secure lines, and the particular disposition of a man who had seen enough institutional failure to stop being surprised by it. He also had a habit of asking zero unnecessary questions, which was its own form of currency. They drove separately. Lena stopped at her apartment, long enough to retrieve the storage box from the closet shelf, and she stood holding it for a moment in the middle of her living room before she carried it to the car. It was heavier than she remembered, or maybe she remembered perfectly and was just noticing the weight differently now. Darnell Ruiz was exactly what Bram had described late 40s, a stillness to him that suggested he spent very little energy on things that didn't matter, and an office that looked chaotic on the surface but had a specific logic once you started reading the room. He shook Lena's hand, looked at the storage box without comment, and pointed them toward a back room with a table and 2 whiteboards that still had someone else's notes on them. "I'll give you the space," Darnell said. "Coffee's on the counter. Don't use the red mug, that one's mine." Then he left and closed the door. Lena set the box on the table. She looked at it for a second, then broke the dust seal along the edge and opened it. Inside, a manila envelope containing printed communication logs, sealed with a clip. A separate envelope marked in her own handwriting, Briefing Counter Order 14 SEP, 2016. 3 photographs face down, a USB drive taped to the inside of the lid. A small notebook field issue, with a cover so worn the color had gone from green to gray. Bram pulled a chair to the opposite side of the table and sat without touching anything. He let her manage it. She laid everything out flat on the table, in order. Then she looked at it all the way she might look at a patient chart, systematically, left to right, without skipping. "The route briefing," she said, pointing. "Command issued an advance order through the Karvesh corridor on the 14th. 2 days prior, our team's forward scout had flagged the eastern segment as compromised possible IED placement, confirmed movement of hostile elements through a choke point at grid reference Delta 7. She touched the envelope without opening it. "I documented the scout's report. I formally contested the route. I submitted an alternative through the western bypass and requested a 48-hour delay for re-reconnaissance. Was it approved? No." She said it flat. Command denied the delay, upheld the original route. The order came through Colonel Marcus Hale's chain. He was senior operations officer for our sector. "What did you do?" "I issued a counter order to my team." She looked at Bram steadily. "I told them we were taking the western bypass on my authority. I documented the deviation and submitted a full report within 6 hours of the operation's completion." She paused. "The team came home. All 10 of us. And Hale opened a disciplinary inquiry the following week. Insubordination, failure to comply with command directive, conduct unbecoming." She touched the notebook. "They didn't give me a hearing. They gave me a process that was designed to reach a conclusion. I was separated within 40 days. Bram was quiet for a moment. Outside the back room, Darnell's warehouse made its ordinary sounds, a pipe somewhere, the distant complaint of old machinery settling into the cold. "The route order on September 14th, Bram said carefully. "Was it revised before the next unit went through?" "Not that I ever saw. It wasn't." His voice had a flatness that wasn't controlled emotion. It was the sound of someone who had been through the particular tunnel of grief and come out the other side carrying only what was functional. "My team ran the eastern segment on October 3rd. The choke point at Delta 7 was still active. We took contact. 2 men didn't make it out. The room held the information. If the route had been modified after my report," Lena said carefully, "they would have been protected. If your report had been read and acted on," Bram said, "instead of buried under a disciplinary file." Lena sat down. She hadn't planned to sit. She'd been standing since she opened the box, and standing felt like the right posture for this. But she sat, and she put both hands flat on the table. And she looked at the document spread out in front of her with the specific feeling of someone who has been carrying something alone for a very long time, and has just been told they are not, in fact, alone. It was not a comfortable feeling. Comfort wasn't the right category for it. It was more like the moment after a splint is removed, the relief and the exposure simultaneously. "What do you have?" she asked. Bram reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced his own envelope. Thinner than hers, but deliberate. "After-action communications from October 3rd. Internal after-action from my team leader, filed but never formally reviewed. And a cross-reference I built manually, over about 8 months, connecting 6 other service members, whose career separations all post-date operations connected to Karvesh sector between 2015 and 2019. He laid the sheets out beside her documents, without overlapping them. 6 names, dates, branches of service, nature of separation, subsequent civilian credential or licensing problems, where applicable. She read down the column. At the bottom, in Bram's handwriting, commanding authority, recurring references to General Harlan Voss. Policy liaison, multiple mentions of Office of Deputy Undersecretary Aldrich Morn. Who's Morn? Lena asked. Defense policy, senior. He's not military political appointment. His office had unusual influence over operational decisions in the Karvesh corridor for the duration of his tenure. Bram tapped the paper. What's unusual is that his role shouldn't have touched operational routing at all. Policy officials don't direct ground operations, except apparently in this case they did, and then they didn't, because there's no official record of it. Someone removed it. Someone removed a great deal. She slept 3 hours on a cot in Darnell's back room, which was 2 hours longer than she'd expected. Bram was awake when she came back to the main space, working on a laptop. Kodiak stretched out on the floor beside him in the sprawled, liquid sleep of a working dog off duty. The coffee on the counter was fresh, which meant Darnell had been in already. She poured a mug and sat across from Bram. "Need to go back to the hospital," she said. He looked up. "The suspension isn't a legal barrier. I'm on administrative leave, not termination. I can enter the building as a visitor." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "I have a patient I want to check on, and I want to see whether Marin Voss has put anything in writing yet about the licensing's discrepancy. They'll know you're there." "I know." She drank the coffee. "Let them." It was the first thing she'd said in the conversation that was something other than information transfer. Bram heard it and didn't comment on it, which was the correct response. Halverton Regional at 9 in the morning was a different creature than its night shift self. Daytime noise, orderlies moving supply carts, visitors in the lobby, someone's child asking loudly why the floors were that color. The institutional morning light that made everything look very ordinary and very clean. Lena walked through the main entrance and went directly to the 4th floor, medical surgical, which was where Gerald Odom's room was. She was in civilian clothes jeans, a dark green jacket, and she moved the way she'd always moved in the hospital, like she belonged, like there was somewhere specific she was going, which was the most effective form of invisibility available without any special equipment. Gerald was sitting up in bed. His wife was in the chair beside him, a compact woman with neat gray-streaked braids, who looked up when Lena knocked on the open door. "I'm Lena," she said. "I was your husband's nurse Tuesday night." Gerald Odom's face did the thing faces do when recognition catches. "You were there when he stopped, recalibrated. They told me this morning what it was, what I actually had. Aortic dissection. Contained. The doctor this morning said if it hadn't been caught when it was..." He stopped again. His wife reached over and put her hand on his forearm. "He said it was caught early, because someone on the floor flagged it quickly. The surgical team did the work," Lena said, "but somebody got the surgical team there." Gerald looked at her directly. He was a big man, heavyset, broad across the shoulders, and his directness had the quality of someone not used to speaking around things. "Was that you?" Lena looked at him. "Yes." Well, he looked at his wife, then back at her. "Thank you." It was said simply, the way sincere things often are, and Lena absorbed it without deflecting further. She stayed for 4 minutes, answered a question Gerald's wife had about the recovery process, and left. She was in the elevator, pressing the button for the 3rd floor to go find Marin Voss's office, when her phone buzzed. It was a text from an internal hospital number HR administrative line. A photo attachment. She opened it. Her nursing license record. State Board database. Official header. And there, in the middle of the documented history, a notation she had never seen before. Provisional suspension pending review, disciplinary inquiry initiated 2019. There was no such inquiry. There had never been one. Her license had been clean and continuous since she'd obtained it. Someone had put it there. The elevator door opened on the 3rd floor. Marin Voss was not in her office. Her assistant, a young man named Patrick, who had the particular tension of someone caught between competing authorities, told Lena that Ms. Voss was in a meeting and wasn't available for walk-ins. "That's fine," Lena said pleasantly. "I'll wait." She sat in the chair across from Patrick's desk and waited with the particular patience of someone who has waited in far worse places for far more urgent outcomes. Patrick spent 7 minutes deciding whether to call someone and ultimately sent a text to someone whose identity he didn't volunteer. 14 minutes later, Marin Voss came out of her office. "Lena." She was as composed as she'd been yesterday. "I didn't know you were coming in. I saw the update to my licensing record," Lena said. She stayed seated. Making Voss stand in the doorway of her own office was a small calibration, but calibrations mattered. I want to understand the source of the 2019 disciplinary notation. Something moved through Maren Voss's face, not guilt. She was too practiced for guilt to be visible. But something reordered. That information would have come from the State Board, she said. The State Board doesn't show that notation on their public-facing portal, Lena said. I checked this morning. Whoever submitted that documentation to you did so outside the normal board process. I'm not asking you to investigate it. I'm telling you what I found. Lena stood up now. She was half a head shorter than Maren Voss, and none of it mattered. Someone created a false record and used it to remove me from a position where I just caught a life-threatening emergency 2 days ago. That's a fact. I'd suggest the hospital's legal team consider what that means for liability, because when this comes apart, and it will, Halverton Regional is going to be on the wrong side of it if they've allowed fabricated documentation to drive employment decisions. Maren Voss blinked once. I'll be in touch about the written documentation I requested yesterday, Lena said. Today, preferably. She left. Bram was parked outside. She got in and told him about the license notation. They moved fast, he said. Too fast. Which means whoever made the call already had the fabricated documentation ready. She looked out the windshield. This wasn't reactive. They had a file built on me already. The suspension was the activation they were waiting for a reason to use it. Which means they've been watching you. Probably since I came to Carver City. She thought about 14 months of deliberate invisibility. The careful middle lane. The not raising her hand too high. It hadn't mattered. They'd known where she was. I want to contact Theo Merritt. Bram's expression shifted. The IG investigator. If Prade handed him a case file and Merritt's been sitting on it, I want to know why. Is he protecting it or has it been compromised? Meeting with an active IG investigator could. I know the risk. Lena turned to look at him. I already have a fabricated notation in my licensing record, an anonymous warning phone call, and an administrative suspension timed to remove me from the floor, where I just identified a misdiagnosed emergency. At what point does caution stop being protective and start being complicit? Bram didn't have an answer for that, because there wasn't one. He pulled out of the parking lot. Theo Merritt was not easy to find, which was the point. He worked out of a regional office that was technically a field extension of the Inspector General apparatus, buried in a building on the north side of Carver City that also housed a procurement office and 2 floors of FEMA administrative staff. The kind of building that announced its own insignificance as a feature. Bram had a contact. He seemed to have contacts the way experienced operators accumulate equipment. Not hoarded, but positioned a former JAG officer named Sylvie Kwan, who had worked a case tangentially connected to the Carvesh inquiry 3 years ago. Sylvie made one phone call, relayed a secure message, and told them Merritt would meet but not at his office, and not anywhere either of them suggested. He picked a coffee shop near the university, which had the useful noise properties of a place where no ambient conversation is sufficiently quiet to be heard over any other. Theo Merritt was younger than Lena, expected mid-30s, with the look of someone who made an effort to look unremarkable and mostly succeeded. Slight build, generic jacket, the kind of face that wouldn't be remembered. He was already there when they arrived, nursing something, and he watched them cross the room with eyes that were doing considerably more work than the rest of him suggested. They sat. He didn't offer his hand. Prade told me there was a possibility someone connected to this case might surface eventually, he said without preamble. I didn't think it would be you specifically. He looked at Lena. Staff Sergeant Marsh. Former, she said. Right, he wrapped both hands around his cup. What do you have? Original documentation from the September 2016 operation. Route order, counter order, communication logs, field photographs, my personal operational log. She paused. And a USB drive with a backup of the team communications I ran through a private server before the Army could access the primary archive. Merritt's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. You backed the communications. I backed the communications the day after the disciplinary inquiry opened. I had 48 hours before they pulled my system access. He looked at her for a long moment, then at Bram. What's your connection? October 3rd operation. Eastern segment, Carvesh corridor, Bram said. To Kaya. After action filed with an operational command who had apparent reason not to read it carefully. Merritt set his cup down. He looked at the table, not avoiding eye contact processing. I've had Prade's file for 16 months, he said quietly. Sitting on it wasn't my choice. The case was flagged internally. I was told it had significant overlap with an active investigation at a higher tier, and that any parallel movement on my end could compromise the primary. I was told to wait. Who told you? Lena said. That's the problem. He looked up. The directive came from above my office. I followed the chain. When I tried to verify the primary investigation it was allegedly protecting, I got 3 different answers from 3 different levels, and none of them matched. There is no primary investigation, Bram said. I'm not ready to conclude that officially, Merritt said. Then, but I'm not ready to conclude the opposite either. Lena studied him. He was careful, but not the careful of someone protecting himself, the careful of someone protecting a case. There was a difference, and she could read it. My license was falsified, she said. I have documentation showing a 2019 disciplinary notation that does not exist in the actual state board record. Someone inserted it to support a fraudulent administrative suspension intended to remove me from my position. Merritt went very still. That's not operational, she said. That's civilian. That crosses into a different jurisdiction. I know what it crosses into. Then you understand this is no longer a matter of waiting for a higher tier to clear the lane. He looked at her for a long moment. The coffee shop hummed around them. 2 students at the next table argued about something to do with a group project, their voices rising and falling in the completely ordinary register of people with ordinary problems. I need to see the USB drive, Merritt said finally, and the original documentation. Knockuppies went. Soon he reached into his jacket pocket and laid a card on the table. Plain name and number only. Call that number with a 3-hour window. Don't tell me the location until the day of. He paused. Do you have somewhere to stay that isn't your apartment? The question landed with its full weight. I'm working on it, Lena said. He nodded once and stood up. He left before them, walking out without looking back, through the ordinary noise of the coffee shop, past the students arguing about their group project, out into the afternoon, and whatever came with it. Lena looked at the card. Bram said, he's scared. He's not scared, she said. He's been waiting for the case to be real enough to move on. Now it is. She pocketed the card. He's not scared. He's relieved. They sat for another moment. The USB drive, Bram said. The backed-up communications. What exactly is on it? Lena looked at the table. She'd known this question was coming since she'd laid everything out at Darnell's warehouse and watched Bram not ask it. The communications include a pre-operation coordination message, she said. Logged the night before September 14th. It was marked routine, copied to 3 command addresses. She paused. One of those addresses is not a military command address. It's a civilian routing designation I didn't recognize at the time. I looked it up 2 years after my discharge when I was well clear of anything that could be used against me. And it routes to the office of the Deputy Undersecretary for Defense Policy. She met Bram's eyes. Aldrich Morn's office received a copy of the route briefing the night before my team was ordered into that corridor. Bram was very still, which means a civilian policy official knew about an operation in real time, Lena said. Before it happened. Before I contested it. Before the deaths on your team 3 weeks later. She kept her voice even. And his office's address appears in the communication logs that someone later went to the trouble of erasing from the primary archive. Outside the window, the afternoon light was doing its November thing, going gray and flat and sideways, the kind of light that made everything look slightly provisional. How far does this go? Bram said. Lena thought about the fabricated notation in her license, the anonymous call, the 6 other service members, the 2 men who hadn't come back from the eastern segment October 3rd, the route order that should have been revised and wasn't, the disciplinary file built to erase the record of a decision that saved 10 people's lives. Further than I thought when I walked into that pawn shop, she said. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, unknown number. Different from the first call's format, shorter prefix. Different regional code, she answered. Static. Then a voice, not the careful, rehearsed voice from the parking garage. This one was older, rougher around the edges. Someone not trained to make calls like this. Is this the nurse? The voice said. The one they suspended. Who is this? A pause full of the particular texture of someone deciding how much rope to cut. My name is Rowan Pfeiffer. I was Colonel Hale's administrative assistant. September 2016 through February 2017. Another pause. I signed the order that erased your communications archive. Someone above Hale told him to do it, and he told me to execute it, and I did, and I've been trying to find the right person to tell for 4 years. The coffee shop noise went somewhere far away. I need to know who gave the order above Hale, Lena said. I need to know you can protect me before I say that name. I'm working on protection, she said. Give me 48 hours. You don't have 48 hours. His voice had shifted something urgent underneath it now, cracking through the careful surface. They contacted me this morning. I don't know how they knew I was about to reach out, but they knew. which means someone is watching the same threads you're pulling. A sharp breath. I'll give you a location. Come alone or don't come. And bring whoever can authenticate what I'm about to give you, because I have the original erasure order with Hale's signature and a routing stamp that goes somewhere above him. Lena's hand tightened on the phone. Across the table, Bram was watching her face and reading it the way trained people read situations, not the words, the information underneath them. Send me the location, she said. The line went silent. 3 seconds later, a text arrived. An address on the far west side of Carver City Industrial District, near the rail yards. Less than 2 miles from Darnell's warehouse. She showed Bram the screen. He looked at it. Then at her. Alone, he said, she told him. That's not happening. I know. She stood up and put her jacket on. Give me a head start. 15 minutes. Come in from the north approach and stay out of sight until I signal. She picked up her bag. And call Merritt. Tell him we need that 3-hour window to happen today. Not eventually. She walked out of the coffee shop and into the gray afternoon, and the cold hit her face immediately. The particular November cold that didn't care what you were walking into. 2 blocks away on a street she didn't know, a man named Rowan Pfeiffer was waiting with a document that could connect the erasure of her record to someone who ranked above a colonel in a chain of command that had already demonstrated it would destroy careers to protect itself. And somewhere in that same city, whoever had called Pfeiffer this morning already knew that something was moving. The gap between those two facts was closing, and Lena Marsh walked toward it with her hand steady and her jaw set, carrying the full weight of what she was and what had been done to her, and what she intended to do about it, all of it, finally pointed in the same direction. The address Pfeiffer had texted led to a self-storage facility on Crane Hollow Road, the kind of place that existed in every mid-sized city's industrial margin. Rows of corrugated metal units behind a chain-link fence, a keypad entry gate that had been broken long enough for someone to prop it permanently open with a cinder block. The kind of place nobody noticed because nobody was supposed to. Lena drove past once before she parked, old habit. The lot had 2 other vehicles, a panel van with commercial plates and an older pickup with a cracked rear window. Neither seemed occupied. Security camera mounted above the office door, angled at the gate, not the units. 1 camera, 1 angle. She filed it and got out of the car. Unit 34 was near the back row. The walk took 90 seconds. Long enough to hear the traffic from the highway, overpass, 2 blocks west, the dry scrape of dead leaves moving across the asphalt, and nothing else. The unit's roll door was up by about 2 feet. She crouched and went under. Rowan Pfeiffer was standing against the back wall, and he was not what she'd expected. The voice had made her picture someone older, more weathered, but he was maybe 42, soft around the middle in the way desk work produces, wearing a gray fleece that had seen better days. He had the look of a man who had not slept well in a long time, not recently, not the last few days kind. The long kind, years of it. He looked at her and said, "You came alone." "I came in alone," she said, "which is what you asked." He understood the distinction and didn't push it. He held a manila folder against his chest with both arms crossed over it, the posture of someone holding something they couldn't put down. "Show me credentials," he said. "I'm a nurse on administrative suspension," she said. "I don't have credentials that mean anything to you right now. What I have is documentation going back to September 2016 that independently corroborates whatever you're holding." She kept her voice level and her hands visible. "That's the exchange, not credentials." Pfeiffer looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was working. The way jaws work when someone is running through a decision they've already made, but keep reconsidering anyway. "I've been carrying this for 4 years, he said. "I know. I tried twice before. Once in 2018, I contacted a lawyer who said there wasn't enough to build a case without official standing. Once in 2020, I reached out to someone I thought I could trust inside the IG network. 3 days later, I got a visit from 2 men in civilian clothes who told me to think carefully about my family." He exhaled. "I have a daughter." "She's 12, I understand," Lena said. "I need to know this doesn't just disappear again. I have an active IG investigator who's been holding a case file for 16 months, waiting for authentication. I have a former Naval Special Operations officer with his own independent documentation. And I have a communications backup from 2016 that shows a civilian policy routing address receiving operational briefing data the night before the route order was issued." She paused. "It won't disappear. The problem now is keeping it moving faster than whoever's trying to stop it." Pfeiffer looked at the folder in his arms. Then he held it out. She took it. Inside, a single-page document, official letterhead, dated September 22, 2016, 8 days after the operation. Colonel Marcus Hale's signature at the bottom, clear and deliberate. Above the signature, a routing block. The document authorized the erasure and reclassification of designated operational communications from the September 14 engagement, citing an ambiguous operational security protocol with a reference number she didn't recognize. And in the routing block at the top, the address that had sent the authorization down to Hale's level. OUSD Peace Policy Coordination Office, Deputy Undersecretary Aldrich Morn. Morn's office hadn't just received a copy of the pre-operation briefing. Morn's office had issued the order to erase the record of what happened after it. Lena stood in the storage unit with the document in her hands and felt the particular sensation of a thing that has been believed in private for years, suddenly becoming real in the physical world. It wasn't satisfaction, it was something more complicated, heavier, with edges that cut in both directions. Was Hale given a reason, she asked. He didn't ask for one, Pfeiffer said. I could see he didn't want one. He passed it straight to me and said execute and document, which is what I did, and I kept a copy. He stopped. I don't know exactly why I kept a copy. I think part of me knew. Part of you knew, she said quietly. Yeah. She took a photograph of the document with her phone, front and back, then carefully replaced it in the folder. I need this original. Authenticated chain of custody matters. Take it, he said. I want it out of my hands. She tucked the folder under her arm. You said they contacted you this morning. What exactly did they say? A call to my work number, which almost nobody has. Male voice didn't identify himself. Said I should understand that any decision I was considering would have consequences I hadn't fully thought through. Pfeiffer's eyes had a flat quality now past fear, into something that had dried out on the other side of it. Word for word, that specific, like something had been written in advance. They knew you were about to reach out. That's what I can't figure. I haven't told anyone. I haven't made any calls. He looked at her. Unless they're monitoring something you used, she said. Email, phone. Do you have a secondary device? No. Was the thread that connected you to me initiated from your regular number? He went still. I found your name through a search 2 weeks ago. On my home laptop, home network. Unencrypted search. She didn't say it out loud. There was no productive use in watching him understand what that meant in real time. From here forward, use nothing connected to your regular identity. Bramp, she corrected herself. The person I came with has resources. We'll get you a clean device. She moved toward the door. Stay here, 15 minutes. Then walk out separately. That's it? She looked back at him. He was standing in the middle of a storage unit with the gray fleece and the years of sleepless nights and a 12-year-old daughter, and she understood the question he was really asking wasn't logistical. You did the right thing, she said. It cost you something real. That matters. He nodded once. The way people nod when words are the best available thing and not quite enough. She went under the roll door and back into the gray afternoon. Bram was on the north side of the lot as agreed, partially screened by a utility van. Kodiak was in the back of the vehicle. She handed him the folder through the window before she said anything else. He read the document. His expression didn't change in any dramatic way, but she saw the slight tightening around his eyes. That meant he was processing something that mattered. Morn, he said, issued the erasure order down through Hale. Which means he wasn't just aware of the operation, he was aware of your team's casualties, my disciplinary file, and the communications that would have connected all of it, and he moved to erase the connections before anyone could run them. He had to know what the route would produce. He had financial interests in the corridor, Lena said. That was in your notes. Private sector, Karvesh region. Defense contracting, Bram said. I couldn't fully establish it before, but there's a pattern. Military activity in the corridor ran concurrent with a significant infrastructure development contract awarded to a consortium with ties to Morn's prior private sector work. More military presence in the corridor, more contract value. He looked at the document again. He needed the route active. He needed the military moving through it. Your counterorder and your formal objection were a threat to the operational continuity. So he made sure the objection disappeared, Lena said, and then made sure I disappeared with it. The weight of it had a specific quality, not the hot weight of anger, which she'd processed long ago, but the denser, colder weight of something confirmed. The difference between suspecting you were targeted and knowing it, she called merit. He picked up on the second ring. We need that window now, she said. Today. I have the original erasure order with Morn's office in the routing block, a witness who executed it under Hale's direction, and the communications backup that matches. She paused. And the witness has been contacted by whoever's monitoring this. The window is closing. A silence on Merritt's end that had decision-making in it. 6 o'clock, he said. There's a federal annex building on Linden, not the main IG office. Side entrance on Merchant Street. I'll have an authentication specialist with me. Will this be protected? Once it's in federal custody, yes. He sounded certain enough, which was not completely certain. Get here, 4 hours was not much time. It was also more than she'd had at several points in the last 72 hours, so she used it. Darnell Ruiz made a clean device available to Pfeiffer, who arrived at the warehouse shaken but functional. Bram ran a review of everything they were bringing to Merit original documents, the USB drive, the folder from the storage unit, the cross-referenced names. Darnell sat at his main workstation and ran a background trace on the routing designation from the erasure order, confirming in under an hour what Bram had partially established. The designation connected to a policy coordination office that had been dissolved in 2020, but had processed defense contracting authorizations throughout its operational period, with recurring overlap in the Karvish sector. The contracting consortium, Darnell said, pulling up a corporate filing screen, is listed under a holding structure that changes names twice in 3 years. But the beneficial ownership documentation where it exists, which isn't everywhere, keeps pointing back to 3 principals. One of them held a senior role in the office of Deputy Undersecretary Morn before moving to private sector. He looked at the screen. You want to know the overlap dates? Tell me, Lena said. The principal left Morn's office in March 2016. The consortium was formally registered in June 2016. The first major contract authorization in the Karvesh corridor came through in August 2016. He turned in his chair. 1 month before your route order. The timeline was not subtle. It was, in fact, the kind of timeline that is only this clear in retrospect, because in the moment it was buried under layers of institutional language and deliberate structural opacity. But in retrospect, laid out on a table in a warehouse in Carver City, it was almost simple. Almost. Is there anything on General Harlan Voss in the contracting chain? Lena asked. Darnell shook his head. Not directly. His name appears in command communications of the sector, which you'd expect he was senior command, but I don't see financial connections, he paused. I think Voss was management. He ran the operational side because that was his job, and because it served the policy framework Morn needed. Whether he understood what he was protecting is a different question. It matters for the prosecution, Bram said. It matters for a lot of things, Lena said. She sat with that for a moment. Voss was not abstract to her. His name was in the chain that had ended her career, and she had spent years with a particular shape of anger attached to it. The possibility that he was a gear in a machine, rather than the machine's architect, didn't reduce what he'd done, but it reordered it. Accountability wasn't the same as origin, and both mattered. Pfeiffer was in the corner of the warehouse working through something on the clean device, and he looked up. There's one more thing I should have said earlier. Everyone looked at him. The original erasure order, the one I showed you. There was a secondary communication. Verbal, which is why I don't have documentation for it. But Hale told me, when he handed me the erasure order, that the directive had been cleared at the Voss level before it came to Morn's office. He stopped, meaning Voss knew about it. The room absorbed this. Voss signed off on erasing my record, Lena said quietly. I can't prove the verbal directive, but Hale told me Voss had been briefed and had no objections, which makes Voss complicit in the cover-up even if he wasn't driving the financial motive, Bram said. Complicit is enough, Lena said. They arrived at the Linden Federal Annex at 5:52 p.m. Side entrance, Merchant Street, exactly as Merritt had said. The building was the particular bureaucratic beige of federal construction from the 1990s and had the institutional anonymity of a place designed to process paperwork rather than make news. Merritt met them in a corridor on the second floor with a woman he introduced only as Specialist Carver, who handled authentication for document integrity and digital forensics. She was brisk, professional, and had the manner of someone whose job was to assess things rather than react to them. She did not seem surprised by the volume of material they'd brought, which was either professional composure or evidence that Merritt had briefed her more thoroughly than he'd let on. They worked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Carver authenticated the original erasure order paper composition, ink dating, signature analysis against existing verified Hale documents. Consistent. She ran the USB drive through a forensic reader, establishing chain of custody and verifying that the communication logs were original files with original timestamps, not copies or reconstructed documents. The routing address in these communications, Carver said, holding up a printout. OUSDP, this is real. This designation was active in September 2016. This is a genuine routing code for the Policy Coordination Office, which connects the pre-operation briefing to Morn's office, Merritt said. And the post-operation erasure order connects back the same direction, Lena said. Merritt was at a desk in the corner, working through the cross-referenced names Bram had assembled. He had a legal pad, and he was moving through it with the methodical attention of someone who had spent a career learning that the shape of a pattern matters more than any individual point within it. 6 service members, he said, all with career disruptions post-Karvesh-connected operations between 2015 and 2019. He looked up, plus you, which makes 7. Plus Callaway's 2KA in October 2016, who can't speak for themselves. He set down the pen. This is not isolated misconduct. This is a sustained systemic pattern of suppression, which is what Prade built his file to show, Lena said. Prade was right. Merritt's voice was measured, but something underneath it had shifted the long-held careful neutrality of a man who'd been told to wait cracking open around the edges. I was told this case could compromise an active investigation. I waited 16 months. There is no active investigation. Someone above my office used that instruction to bury this, and I let it happen because the chain of command said so, and He stopped. Exhaled. That's a problem I'm going to have to sit with. Nobody told him it wasn't. That was the right call. What happens now? Pfeiffer asked from the corner. He'd been quiet through most of the authentication process, watching with the look of someone seeing a thing they'd carried become real in front of them. I file an emergency authentication report tonight, Merritt said. Under the IG statute, authenticated evidence of this type triggers mandatory review by the senior IG. I cannot file this and have it sit. The statute requires action within 72 hours. He looked at Lena, and based on the civilian license falsification, this also crosses into Department of Justice jurisdiction. I have to make a referral. How long before it gets exposed to whoever's been trying to contain it? Bram asked. The senior IG level is supposed to be insulated. In practice, Merritt stopped. I can't guarantee it doesn't get in front of the wrong people before it gets in front of the right ones. That's the honest answer. Then we need something else moving at the same time, Lena said. Congressional, Bram said. Merritt nodded slowly. If this reaches the Senate Armed Services Committee directly, not through the executive channel, that's a lane I can't control, and neither can anyone trying to stop this. He looked at Lena. Do you have any connection to that committee's staff? No, she said. But Sylvie Kwan does. She looked at Bram. Your JAG contact. Bram pulled out his phone. The next 40 minutes were a specific kind of controlled urgency, not panic. Not the disorganized speed of people who are reacting, but the concentrated forward motion of people who understand that the window is real and the alternatives are not good. Sylvie Kwan, reached by Bram, confirmed she had a working relationship with a staff investigator on the Armed Services Committee. She'd worked a procurement case with him 2 years ago. She could make a contact. Not guaranteed, but real. Make the contact tonight, Bram said. Tonight? Tonight. She heard something in his voice and didn't argue. Merritt left with the authentication documents at 8:40 p.m., taking Carver with him. He shook Lena's hand before he left, not a formal handshake, the kind of handshake that acknowledges something. I'm sorry it took this long, he said. Move fast now, she said. That's what matters. He left. The room had a different quality without him, not emptier but shifted. Pfeiffer was working through the clean device, setting up a secure communication protocol Darnell had walked him through. Bram was on the phone in the corridor. Kodiak was sitting next to Lena with his head against her knee, which she'd stopped finding remarkable 3 days ago and had started finding useful. She was reviewing the cross-reference names when her phone buzzed. Internal number, Halverton Regional, she answered. This is Dr. Petra Schull, said the voice on the other end. I'm calling you directly because I think you deserve that. A pause with decision in it. The hospital's legal team has been in contact with the state licensing board. The 2019 notation on your record has been flagged as potentially erroneous. The board's compliance office has opened an inquiry into how it was entered. Lena stood very still. I want you to know, Schull continued, that I raised the question with legal about the source of the notation before they contacted the board. I made clear that the timing of your suspension in relation to your clinical actions with the Odom patient was not something the hospital could ignore from a liability standpoint. A brief pause. I also may have used the word unconscionable at some volume. Something moved through Lena that wasn't quite amusement, but was adjacent to it. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. Come back to work when this is cleared. You're wasted on nights, as I said. I meant it. Schull hung up without ceremony. She stood holding the phone. Bram came back into the room. Sylvie made the contact, he said. Committee staff investigator name is Warren Ossie. He's interested. He wants documentation by tomorrow morning, and he wants it delivered directly, not through any official channel that could route through DOD. We have copies of everything, Lena said. Digital and physical. Sylvie will courier the physical copies tonight. He looked at her. How are you? The question was practical, not therapeutic. He meant physically sleep, food, operational status. She recognized the format. I'm fine, she said. Keep going. He looked at her for exactly 1 second longer than the practical version of the question required, and then he nodded and moved to help Darnell compile the courier package. At 10:30 p.m., 3 things happened within 11 minutes of each other. The first, Darnell picked up an alert on a monitoring system he ran on the Public Records Network. A query had been run against Pfeiffer's name in a DoD personnel database. Not a routine audit query. A targeted lookup, access level above standard, time-stamped 40 minutes ago. Someone in the DoD system knew Pfeiffer had moved. The second, Bram received a text from Sylvie. The committee staff investigator Warren Ossie had made a preliminary inquiry quietly, through a back channel to confirm that the Karvesh corridor operational files were accessible. He'd been told the files were currently under a security classification review, and access was temporarily restricted. No such review was on record in the public classification registry. Someone had placed a hold on the files within the last 72 hours. Within the last 72 hours, which was exactly how long they'd been moving. The third, Lena's phone rang. Not an unknown number this time. Not an internal hospital number. It was an Carver City Police Department number. She answered. Miss Marsh, a woman's voice, neutral, procedural. This is Detective Anara Moss, Carver City PD, Major Crimes. I need you to come in for a conversation. About what? We've received information that you may be in possession of classified government materials obtained through unauthorized means. A pause. I want to be straightforward with you. This came to us through a federal referral, which means I'm required to follow up. But I'm telling you directly rather than sending officers to your door, because I think you deserve to understand what's happening. Lena looked across the room. Bram had heard enough from her end to understand the shape of it. His expression was the specific controlled neutral of someone filing information while it's incoming. When, she said. Tonight if possible. The referral has a timeline attached. I need 2 hours. 1. She hung up. They got ahead of us, Bram said. Not far enough ahead. Lena picked up her jacket. The documents are already with Merit authenticated, in federal IG custody. The copies are going to OSE tonight. The referral to police is harassment, not prosecution. They're trying to slow us down and make the documentation look like it's obtained through misconduct. If you walk into a police station tonight, I don't walk in alone, she said. I walk in with the authentication receipt from Merit, showing the documents are already in official IG custody, meaning I'm not in possession of classified materials. The IG office is. She looked at him. Call Sylvie again. I need a JAG-qualified attorney to meet me at that station in 55 minutes. Sylvie's in the field. Then call her louder. Bram's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite not. He dialed. Lena stood in the middle of Darnell's warehouse and thought through the next 90 minutes in the compressed, sequential way she'd been trained to think through a contested situation, what she had, what they had, what moved first, what the acceptable losses were, and what wasn't acceptable at any cost. They had moved the documents. That was irreversible, and that was everything. Whatever came next, the documents were already moving through channels that couldn't be unopened. She put her jacket on. And then Darnell, at his workstation, said Lena. Something in his voice made everyone in the room stop. The DoD query on Pfeiffer, he said. I ran the access credential that pulled it. He turned his monitor so she could see the screen. The credential belongs to a senior official in the Office of Defense Policy. Active credential, current access, used 11 minutes ago from a DoD building in the Capitol. He looked at her. The name on the credential is Aldrich Morn. The room held it. He pulled the query himself, Bram said. Not through staff. He's managing this personally, Lena said. Which means he knows the containment is failing, Darnell said. When people at that level start doing things themselves, it means they don't trust anyone else to do it. Which means he's scared, Lena said. She picked up the authentication receipt from the table. One sheet of paper with Merit's case number and the federal IG seal. The most important piece of paper she'd held since the erasure order. If Morn is pulling records himself at 10:30 at night, she said, it means whatever he planned to do next is already in motion. She looked at the room, Bram with the phone, Darnell at the screen, Pfeiffer in the corner, holding his clean device in both hands like it was something fragile, Kodiak standing now, reading the room the way dogs read rooms. We need to get to that police station, she said, and we need the courier package to OC to move up. Right now, not in the morning. It's 10:30 p.m., Darnell said. I know what time it is. Bram had the phone to his ear. He held up a hand, someone answering. He listened for 4 seconds, and his expression changed, sharpened. He lowered the phone. OC just called Sylvie back, he said. He went to pull the Carvesh operational files independently, not through DoD channels, through a committee access request. They're not restricted. The restriction Sylvie was told about doesn't exist. He looked at Lena. Someone told Sylvie the files were restricted to make us think the congressional lane was closed. But it's not. She stood completely still for 1 second. Then send the package now, she said. And someone needs to tell me, does Merritt know that Morn just pulled Pfeiffer's file personally? Nobody answered immediately because the answer was no, and the answer being no was a problem, and they all understood what kind of problem it was at the same moment. Lena was already dialing Merritt before the silence finished. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he was still awake and still at his desk, which meant he already knew something was wrong. I was about to call you, he said. Morn pulled Pfeiffer's personnel record 40 minutes ago from a DoD terminal. Personal credential. A silence, Merritt. I know, he said. Because 40 minutes ago I received a communication from the senior IG's office telling me my authentication filing tonight has been flagged for secondary review before it can be processed. His voice was steady, but the thing underneath it wasn't. The secondary review process can take up to 30 days. 30 days, the authentication in federal custody, but frozen. The document secured but immobile. Morn pulling records from a terminal in the Capitol, while the process designed to stop him was suspended in bureaucratic amber. That's not a coincidence, she said. No, Merritt said. It's not. And then in the particular silence that follows a thing that cannot be taken back, Lena, I need you to listen to me. I have access to one more channel that I've never used, a direct reporting mechanism to the Senate Armed Services Committee that exists outside the executive review process. Using it means going over every head between me and that committee simultaneously. It means my career in this office ends tonight. She listened. Tell me whether to use it, he said. Because I will. But I need to hear it from you, the warehouse. The gray November night outside the windows. Kodiak standing in the middle of the room, still watching her. Pfeiffer with his clean device. Bram with his phone and his 2 dead teammates and 2 years of cross-referencing files nobody else would look at. Gerald Odom going home to his family because she'd pulled a cord at 8:32 p.m. without waiting for permission, she said. A pause that was not hesitation but something else, the specific weight of a decision being made by a person who understands the full cost of it. Sending now, Merritt said. The line stayed open. She could hear typing. Then it sent, she exhaled. Get to that police station, Merritt said. And Lena, whatever they say when you walk in, they're already too late. She was moving before he finished the sentence, and behind her, Bram was telling Darnell to send the courier package, and Kodiak was at her heel without being called, and somewhere in the Capitol, a man who had spent years using institutional machinery to protect his own interests had just pulled one record too many from a terminal at 10:30 at night, and in doing so had confirmed, to everyone who was now watching, exactly how much he had to lose. The Carver City Police Department's Major Crimes Division occupied the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old coffee and floor wax, and the particular institutional fatigue of a place that processed too many cases with too few people. Detective Anara Moss met Lena in the lobby at 11:22 p.m., which was 8 minutes past the 1-hour window she'd given on the phone, and she did it without comment on the time, which told Lena something about her. Moss was in her mid-40s, dark-skinned, with close-cropped natural hair, and the kind of posture that suggested she'd been on her feet for most of the day and wasn't going to let it show. She looked at Lena, then at the woman beside her. Sylvie Kwan had made the 55-minute window with 4 minutes to spare, arriving in a coat she'd clearly grabbed on the way out the door, jaggy background and a current civilian law license that made her exactly qualified to be in this room. Attorney Moss asked, looking at Sylvie. Yes, Sylvie said. Moss nodded once and led them upstairs without the kind of procedural friction that would have told Lena this was a setup. The absence of friction was information too. Moss had received a federal referral she was required to act on, and she was acting on it, but her manner was that of a detective doing a job rather than a detective building a case. The interview room was small and had a recording system that Moss activated openly, stating the time and the parties present before she said anything else. Lena noted it and didn't react. The referral I received, Moss began, came from a DoD Security Liaison Office. It alleges that you obtained classified operational documents through unauthorized access to military record systems and are in current possession of those materials. Sylvie spoke before Lena could. The materials in question are original documents belonging to my client, created during her period of active military service. They have been transferred to the custody of the Inspector General's office under an authenticated filing by IG investigator Theo Merritt. My client is not in possession of classified materials. The IG office is. She set a copy of the authentication receipt on the table. That's the receipt. Case number timestamp. Merritt's credentials. Moss looked at it. She picked it up, read it, set it down. The referral was filed at 9:47 p.m. tonight, Moss said. The authentication filing was timestamped 8:52 p.m., Sylvie said. 55 minutes prior. Moss looked at the receipt again. Something in her expression shifted, not dramatic. A small recalibration. The referral claims the materials were obtained in the last 48 hours through unauthorized access. They were obtained from my client's own storage, Sylvie said. Documented personal effects maintained since her military discharge. There is no unauthorized access to classify. Then why did a DoD liaison file a referral at 9:47 p.m. on a Sunday? The question was not rhetorical. Moss was asking it the way detectives ask questions when the answer is already forming a shape they want confirmed. Lena spoke for the first time since sitting down. Because the documentation I gave to the IG investigator tonight connects a senior DoD policy official to a falsified discharge, a fraudulent erasure order, and the suppression of operational records affecting at least 7 service members over a period of 4 years. She kept her voice level. And because that official accessed personnel records from a DoD terminal tonight at approximately 10:30 p.m. personally, using his own credential, 11 minutes after being alerted that his name appeared in authenticated evidence. Moss was quiet for a moment. That's a significant allegation, she said. I have the authentication receipt in your hand, Lena said. I have an IG investigator who filed an emergency direct channel report to the Senate Armed Services Committee within the last 2 hours. And I have a staff investigator on that committee who is currently reviewing documentary evidence. She met Moss's eyes. The referral to this department is obstruction dressed up as procedure. I think you can see that. Moss looked at the receipt, then at Lena, then at Sylvie. I'm going to need to make some calls, she said. Make them, Sylvie said. Moss left the room. The recording system stayed active. Lena and Sylvie sat in the small wax smelling room and did not speak, which was the correct choice. After 17 minutes, Moss came back in. She sat down, turned off the recording system, and looked at Lena directly. The DoD liaison who filed the referral, she said, doesn't appear in the official liaison directory for this jurisdiction. I ran the name. It's a real credential, but the assignment to this region is not documented in any roster I can access. She paused, which means someone used a real DoD identity to file a referral through a channel they're not officially authorized to use. Morin's office, Lena said quietly. I can't confirm that tonight. I know. Moss looked at the receipt one more time. Then she set it back on the table in front of Lena with the deliberate placement of someone returning something that was never theirs to hold. You're not being detained. You came in voluntarily, and the referral's basis is not supportable, given the authentication documentation. She stood up. I'm going to document this interview and flag the referral as potentially fraudulent. That goes into a report that will be visible to anyone reviewing this case from any direction. Thank you, Sylvie said. Don't thank me, Moss said, which was the second time Lena had heard that in one evening. Get some sleep, both of you. They were back in the lobby at 12:08 a.m. Outside, the November air was sharp and still. Bram was parked across the street, engine running. Lena got in the passenger side. Sylvie took the back seat beside Kodiak, who regarded her briefly and then returned his attention to the windshield. How bad? Bram asked. Manageable, Lena said. The referral was fraudulent. Moss knows it. She'll document it. Which adds another layer of documented obstruction, Sylvie said from the back. She sounded awake in the specific way of lawyers who run on adrenaline during cases and crash later. Every move Morin makes to contain this is now part of the evidentiary record. He's overextended, Bram said. He's panicking, Lena said. There's a difference. Overextended means you've stretched too far, and you know it. Panicking means you're making decisions faster than you're thinking them through. She looked out the windshield at the quiet street. The personal terminal access tonight. The fraudulent referral. These aren't the moves of someone managing a situation. These are the moves of someone trying to outrun it. Bram pulled away from the curb. OC received the courier package 40 minutes ago. Sylvie, your contact confirmed? Confirmed, Sylvie said. He's reviewing tonight. He said he'd have a preliminary read by 6 a.m. 6 a.m. 5 hours and 40 minutes. Lena put her head back against the seat and looked at the ceiling of the car. She was tired in the specific compound way of someone who has been running on decision-making fuel for too long. Not sleepy, not slow, just aware that the body has a ledger that will be presented, eventually, regardless of what the mind wants. There's a name I haven't raised yet, she said. Colonel Marcus Hale. Bram glanced at her. He signed the erasure order. He transmitted it through Pfeiffer. He's been out of the Army for 2 years medical retirement. She looked at the ceiling. He's a witness. He's also implicated, Sylvie said. He followed an order he had reason to question and didn't. That's culpability, not origination. She sat up. Pfeiffer said Hale knew what the order meant, knew what it was protecting. He did it anyway. She paused. But Hale is also the cleanest direct link between Morn's office and the operational level. Cooperates, the chain is complete. Does he have any reason to cooperate? Bram asked. He has every reason not to, Lena said, which means we need to give him a better reason. They found Hale through public records by 2 a.m. retired, living in a suburb 40 minutes south of Carver City, the address available because he'd registered a vehicle there 6 months ago. Lena did not go to his house at 2 a.m. because that was the kind of decision that looked like pressure, and she didn't want to look like pressure. She wanted to look like the only good option he had left. She slept 3 hours on the cot at Darnell's warehouse. Not well, but sufficiently. At 5:40 a.m., Bram's phone rang. It was Warren Ossie. Bram put it on speaker. Ossie's voice was brisk and had the particular quality of a man who had been awake through the night processing something he couldn't put down. I've reviewed the documentation package, the cross-reference, the communications logs, the erasure order, the routing confirmation to oust a P. A pause. This is real. This is documented systemic suppression of operational evidence with a financial motive connected to an active policy official. I'm taking this to the committee chair at 7 a.m. What does that mean procedurally? Sylvie asked. Emergency closed session. Today, the chair has the authority to issue a preservation order on all Carvesh operational files, which supersedes any classification review or access restriction currently placed on them. A brief pause. And it means Merritt's direct channel filing from last night gets formally received rather than administratively suspended. The secondary review process that was imposed on his authentication filing. The committee can override it. Lena sat up on the cot. She had been awake for the last 20 minutes anyway, listening to the warehouse settle in the pre-dawn cold. Timeline, she said, session convenes at 10. If the chair agrees, and I believe she will, preservation order is issued before noon. Ossie's voice shifted slightly. I want to say something directly to Sergeant Marsh. Go ahead, she said. The documentation you've provided is the kind of thing that takes years to build and rarely survives intact long enough to matter. The fact that you maintained it in original form, with chain of custody preserved, for 9 years, that's why this is actionable. That's the difference between a complaint and a case. He paused. I wanted you to know that. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said, thank you. Move fast. Already moving, he said and hung up. She called Hale at 7:15 a.m. from a clean line. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice carrying the particular grogginess of someone woken from genuine sleep. When she identified herself, the grogginess cleared instantly, replaced by a silence, so complete she could hear him breathing. I know who you are, he said finally. Then you know why I'm calling. Another silence. I'm retired, I know. Medical retirement, 2022. 2 years out, and you're still carrying the September 2016 order. She kept her voice neutral, not aggressive, not sympathetic, just direct. The erasure order with your signature is now in authenticated federal IG custody. The communications backup connecting the pre-operation briefing to Morn's office is in Congressional Committee custody. The committee convenes an emergency session in less than 3 hours. She paused. You signed an order that you knew the purpose of. That's documented. What isn't documented is who told you specifically that Voss had been briefed and had no objections. Hale's breathing had a different quality now. If that's documented, she continued, through your testimony given voluntarily to a congressional investigator before the session, rather than after your role becomes cooperation rather than culpability. After the session, that distinction may no longer be available to you. A long silence. My family, he said. I'm not threatening your family. I know you're not. He stopped. I have a son. He's finishing his last year at the academy. Colonel, she said it quietly. 10 soldiers came home because I refused an order that had your name on it. 2 Navy operators died because the route wasn't corrected after I reported it. 7 careers were destroyed by a process you participated in. She didn't say it hard, she said it flat, like it simply was. Your son is finishing at the academy. He's going to serve. Don't hand him a service built on the thing you helped bury. The silence this time had a different texture, not the silence of resistance. The silence of something giving way along an old fault line. I need an attorney present, Hale said. That's the right call, she said. Call Sylvie Kwan. She's expecting to hear from you. She gave him the number. You have 2 hours, she hung up. Bram was looking at her from across the room. We'll see, he said. I don't know, she said honestly. But he heard it. At 9:50 a.m., 10 minutes before the committee session convened, Sylvie called to say Hale had made contact and asked for an emergency statement arrangement. The committee staff had been informed. His attorney, his own, not Sylvie, was being briefed. At 10:14 a.m., the Senate Armed Services Committee convened in closed emergency session. OC sent a single-word text. And at 11:02 a.m., the preservation order on all Karvesh operational files was issued. Every file, every communication, every after-action report connected to operations in the Karvesh corridor from 2014 to 2020 was placed under congressional custody, access restricted to committee investigators only meaning Mourne's office. DoD security liaisons and anyone operating through executive channels could no longer touch them. Lena was sitting in Darnell's warehouse when the text came through. She read it twice. Then she set the phone on the table and sat with her hands flat on the surface, the way she'd sat at the beginning of all of this, in the storage room at Darnell's place with the box open in front of her. Same posture, different weight, not done, but different. What followed was not a clean sequence. It was the institutional equivalent of a dam developing multiple fractures simultaneously, not a single dramatic breach, but a spreading, self-reinforcing collapse that moved faster with each new opening. Mourne's attempt to classify the Karvesh files had been executed at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. The committee's preservation order, time-stamped at 11:02 a.m., superseded it, but the attempted classification was itself now on record, logged in the committee's documentation as evidence of active obstruction. A senior official attempting to classify files that were simultaneously under IG authentication review and congressional inquiry was not a defensible position. Mourne's legal team, who apparently existed and had been active for at least 12 hours before Lena knew it, filed a statement asserting that the classification action had been routine and unrelated to the IG investigation. Nobody with access to the timeline believed this. General Harlan Voss's promotion hearing, which had been scheduled for the following Thursday, was suspended by the morning of the second day. No formal announcement. His name simply disappeared from the calendar published by the Confirmation Office, replaced by a scheduling note citing pending review. In Washington, scheduling notes are a language, and everyone who needed to read this one read it. Pfeiffer gave a formal statement to committee investigators on the second afternoon. He was accompanied by his own attorney, a detail he'd arranged himself through a process that had cost him 3 sleepless hours and the last of a retainer he'd saved for a different crisis entirely. His statement covered the execution of the erasure order, the verbal communication from Hale regarding Voss's awareness, and the 2020 visit from the 2 men in civilian clothes. He cried once, briefly. In the middle of describing the visit not from fear, his attorney later noted in a memorandum, but from the specific release of someone who has held a weight in place for so long that setting it down produces its own kind of grief. Hale gave his statement on the third day. He named names. He confirmed that Voss had been briefed before the erasure order was transmitted, that Voss had expressed no objection and had indicated verbally. In a private communication, Hale had not retained, but could describe in precise detail that the directive came from above and that full compliance was expected. He confirmed that he had understood the order's purpose, had understood that it would suppress evidence of a decision that had produced both the survival of Lena's team and the death of 2 operators 3 weeks later, and had complied anyway. He was asked why. He said, "Because I thought the system would find a way to be right eventually, and I told myself I could live with waiting for that." He paused. "I was wrong about both parts." Lena read the transcript of that statement in Darnell's warehouse, alone, while Bram was on a call with Osei, and Darnell was on his 3rd coffee. She read it once and then set it face down on the table and stared at the wall for a while. She didn't have a word for what she felt about Hale. Contempt wasn't complete. Understanding wasn't accurate. It was somewhere in the complicated territory between those 2 things, which wasn't a comfortable place to live, but was, she had come to understand, the place where most of the true things happened. By the 4th day, Mourne had retained 3 attorneys and stopped making public statements. His office had issued a single written response to the committee's request for documents, invoking executive privilege on 4 categories of communication. The committee's legal staff had spent approximately 6 hours concluding that the privilege claims were not applicable to the specific documents requested, and had issued a formal rejection with the particular institutional patience of people who have done this before and know how it ends. 2 former members of Mourne's Policy Coordination Office came forward independently, not together, not coordinated, but within 18 hours of each other, suggesting they had been watching the situation and waiting for the moment when waiting was more dangerous than speaking. Both had information about the contracting consortium. Both had documentation they'd retained through the instinct. Pfeiffer had also described the faint persistent awareness that something might need to be proved later. One of them had a memorandum dated July 2016 from a senior official in Morn's office, not Morn himself, but close enough to matter, directing that operational routing in the Karvesh corridor be treated as a policy priority and that any command-level deviations from approved routes be flagged immediately for policy office review. 2 months before Lena's counterorder, 2 months before the order had even been issued, they had been watching the corridor, watching for deviations. She had deviated, and the flag had gone to the policy office, and the policy office had ensured the deviation was erased. Lena read that memo, sitting across from Bram at a table in a diner on South Halver Street, the same diner where she'd first said, "Tell me everything you have," and she set it down and looked out the window at the street and thought about September 2016 and a night with diesel in the air and 10 people who'd come home. They were monitoring operational compliance to protect a financial interest, Bram said. Yes. And when you deviated from their approved route, you didn't just disobey a command order. He looked at her. You threatened the value of a contract, and they made sure I understood the cost of that. Outside, the street moved through its ordinary morning. A bus, a woman walking a dog, a delivery van pulling up to the dry cleaner 2 doors down. The ordinary world continuing exactly as it had continued, while all of this was buried under institutional language and falsified records and the particular cowardice of people who told themselves the system would eventually be right. "Osei wants you to testify," Bram said. She looked at him. "Not just a written statement. In person. The committee wants to put a face to this." He paused. "You don't have to." "I know." She looked back out the window. "I'll do it. There will be cameras. It'll be public record." "Good," she said. And she meant it. The hearing was set for 11 days out. In the intervening period, the documentation continued to expand in the way evidence expands when a structure begins to open new material surfacing from newly willing witnesses, cross-references resolving into connections that had been invisible in isolation but were obvious in aggregate. The most significant development came on the 7th day. A retired intelligence officer named Colonel Dex Farrow, who had served in a signals intelligence role with operational oversight of the Karvesh sector from 2015 to 2018, contacted the committee directly. Not through a lawyer, not through an intermediary. He sent an email to Warren Osei's committee address from a personal account at 6:40 in the morning with a subject line that read, "Ray, Karvesh recordings you don't know exist." Osei called Lena within 20 minutes of reading it. "He says he has command recordings," Osei said, audio. "Pre-operation coordination calls. He describes them as capturing discussions between senior military leadership and Morn's office regarding operational routing decisions." He paused. "He says they were made through a legal signals intelligence protocol that he operated. He kept duplicates in personal archive because the original copies were flagged for destruction in 2019 under the same security classification that we now know was used to erase your communications." Lena was standing in the middle of Darnell's warehouse when she heard this. Kodiak was at her feet, and she put her hand on his head without deciding to. "What's on them?" she asked. "He hasn't disclosed the full content. He says he will. To the committee. In person." Osei's voice had something in it that was controlled excitement, struggling against professional composure. "But he told me one thing. He said the recordings include a call in which a representative of Morn's office is explicitly told that a route deviation had been filed by a unit medical officer and that the deviation threatened the operational continuity that the policy office required. The response from the Morn representative, his words was, 'Handle it at the command level. The record needs to be clean.'" Lena stood very still. The record needs to be clean. Her discharge, her falsified licensing notation. 7 careers, 2 dead operators, Pfeiffer's sleepless years. Hale's weight and his son at the academy. Rowan Pfeiffer in a storage unit holding a folder against his chest like something fragile. All of it from a sentence on a phone call in 2016. "The record needs to be clean." "Colonel Farrow will testify," she said. "He's already agreed," Osei said. "He's coming in," she exhaled. "Lena," Osei's voice shifted. "With the recordings, the chain is complete. From Morn's office to the command level, to the erasure, to your Duscherchers, to the suppression of the 7 service members. It's complete." A pause. "The committee chair has already spoken to the DOJ. There will be a criminal referral. This is going to prosecution." She sat down. Not from weakness, just because there was a chair, and she had been standing for a long time, and the information warranted a seated response. "Okay," she said. "There's one more thing," Osei said, and his voice had a different quality now. "Careful. The way people get when they're delivering something they're not sure how to frame. Mourne's office released a statement this morning. They're characterizing the committee's investigation as politically motivated. They're claiming the documentary evidence was fabricated or selectively obtained. He paused. And they named you specifically. By name, by former rank, by the discharge characterization. He stopped. They said you have a history of insubordination and that your documentation should be understood in that context. The warehouse was very quiet. They named me, Lena said. Yes. She looked at the far wall. The whiteboards Darnell had cleared to make room for their working documents were still faintly marked with the ghost of someone else's notes from before all of this. The ordinary traces of an ordinary office before it became something else. Good, she said again. And she meant that too, not in anger, not in triumph, but in the specific clear-eyed recognition of someone who understood that being named publicly by a panicking official, with 3 lawyers and a collapsing position, was not a threat. It was a confession of how afraid they were. Bram appeared in the doorway. He had his phone in his hand, and his expression was the specific one that meant he had information and was reading whether she was ready for it. Pharaoh's recordings, he said. Darnell's been running a separate verification on the Signals Intelligence Archive from that period. He found a secondary reference, a log entry that shouldn't exist in a public accessible database, but got misrouted in a 2020 archive migration. He held up his phone so she could see the screen. The call Pharaoh described the one where the Mourne representative says the record needs to be clean. The log entry shows 4 participants, not 2. She looked at the screen. 4 call participants. Mourne's representative. Senior command. Pharaoh's signals channel. And a 4th designation she hadn't seen before, an extension code that Darnell had run through the same corporate filing trace he'd used on the contracting consortium. It came back to a communications account registered to the consortium's lead holding company. A private contractor was on the call, she said. Not just on it, Bram said. The log shows they initiated it. She sat with that for a long moment. The story she had understood for 9 years, a military commander, a policy official, a financial interest had just acquired a 4th wall, a private entity with direct financial stake in the corridor's operational activity, initiating a call that resulted in a command-level directive to erase the record of a medical officer's refusal to send her team through a route that would have killed them. Not just military misconduct, not just policy corruption, a private interest that had reached into military command and pulled. OC needs to know this before the hearing, she said. Already texting him, Bram said. Outside the warehouse windows, the November morning had gone flat and gray again, the same light as every other November morning in Carver City, indifferent to what was happening underneath it. Lena sat at the table with the documents and the ghost of the whiteboards, and Kodiak's weight against her leg, and thought about 11 days in a hearing room and the specific act of saying true things out loud in a place where they became permanent. She thought about the velvet pouch in her jacket pocket, the medals she still hadn't returned to the storage box, carrying them with her through the last 10 days out of a habit she hadn't examined. She thought about Rowan Pfeiffer's daughter, 12 years old, about Hale's son at the academy, about 2 operators who didn't come home from the eastern segment on October 3rd, and whose families had received documentation saying it was enemy contact under adverse conditions, which was true, and also not the whole truth, and whose families deserved the whole truth. She thought about Gerald Odom pressing his hand to his abdomen and saying something felt like it was tearing. Some things, once you see them clearly, cannot be made unclear again. And then her phone rang, not Ose, not Bram, not Sylvie, a number she didn't recognize, with a capital area code. And when she answered, the voice on the other end was a woman she didn't know. And the woman said, "My name is Louise Farrow, Dex Farrow's wife. He told me to call you directly if anything happened." And her voice caught just slightly, the catch of someone who is prepared for a conversation and found the preparation insufficient. 3 men came to our house this morning. They identified themselves as federal security. They took the recordings. The warehouse went very still. All of them, Lena said, all of them, a breath. But Dex, before he agreed to testify, he gave a copy to someone he trusted. I don't know who. He didn't tell me in case they came. She paused. He said to tell you, the copy exists, and the person holding it knows what to do with it, and they're already moving. Lena stood up. Tell your husband to get to a safe location, she said. Right now, not later now. She hung up. Bram was already looking at her. They took the recordings, she said. His jaw tightened. But there's a copy, she said. And whoever has it is already moving. She picked up her jacket. We need to get to Ose. In person right now. If they went to Farrow's house with federal identifications, they're not operating inside the law anymore, she said. They're operating inside the shape of the law. There's a difference. She was at the door. and that difference is the whole case. She walked out into the gray morning, and behind her Kodiak's nails clicked on the concrete as he followed without being called, and the distance between where they were and where this ended was measured now not in documents or authentication receipts or committee sessions, but in whoever was moving with a copy of a recording that could prove a private interest had reached into the United States military and pulled, and whether they could get there before someone else made that copy disappear too. The 90 minutes between Tatum's statement and the 1,500 meeting were the longest 90 minutes Mara had spent in a building that wasn't actively on fire. She spent them in the documentation room, finishing what she'd started. Not because she thought the record needed her version, now that Tatum had given his it didn't. His rank carried more institutional weight than anything she could produce, but because she had started it and she was going to finish it, and finishing things was the one habit she had never successfully broken, even when breaking it might have been easier. She wrote until 1,448. Then she saved the document, printed 2 copies, put one in an envelope addressed to Vance and one in her own file, and walked to conference room A. The room was already half full when she arrived. It was the kind of conference room that had been designed to project authority: long table, leather chairs, a projection screen at one end, the framed institutional photographs that accumulate in administrative spaces like sediment. 14 people were already seated or standing, and the quality of the silence when Mara came through the door told her that her arrival had been anticipated in a way that not everyone had managed to prepare for. She recognized most of the faces: department heads, 2 members of the hospital's executive committee, a woman she didn't know with the specific erect posture of a military officer in civilian clothes, sitting near the end of the table with a folder and a tablet, and the expression of someone present in an official capacity. Decker was there, which surprised her. Charge nurses were not usually invited to executive committee meetings, and his presence told her something about how Vance had structured this. Fick was at the head of the table. Sloan was 2 seats to his left. Neither of them looked at her when she entered. Fick was looking at his folder. Sloan was looking at the projection screen, which was showing nothing. Vance came in 30 seconds after Mara, which Mara suspected was deliberate. The colonel had changed into her uniform. Full uniform, ribbons, the entire weight of her rank made visible in the specific way it is made visible when a senior officer room to understand something without having to say it. She took the seat at the opposite end of the table from Fick. The woman Mara didn't recognize Vance introduced as Major Lynette Okafor from the Joint Medical Review Authority. Okafor had flown in from Denver. This had apparently been arranged overnight. The meeting opened without ceremony. Vance spoke first. The reason we're here in an expedited format rather than the standard review timeline is that circumstances have developed that make the standard timeline inadequate. General Tatum made a formal statement at 1,309 hours today, witnessed by 4 individuals and recorded by my aide. That statement is being entered into both the military oversight record and the hospital's administrative record simultaneously. She looked down the table. Major Okafor is here because the statement implicates a classified service record, and the Joint Medical Review Authority has jurisdiction over cases where a physician's military history intersects with a civilian institutional review. Okafor opened her folder. She didn't look up. I'll be brief, because the substance of what I'm presenting should be straightforward. The service record of Dr. Mara Voss, formerly Major Mara Voss of the 14th Forward Surgical Unit, was declassified at the appropriate level this morning under emergency authorization. She turned a page. The record shows that Dr. Voss completed 18 months of combat surgical deployment, during which she performed over 240 documented surgical procedures under field conditions. The engagement that resulted in her medical discharge was a direct hostile engagement, resulting in the loss of 2 senior officers and the wounding of 9 personnel. Major Voss assumed command of the surgical element and tactical coordination of the defensive position for approximately 6 hours until reinforcement and evacuation. Another page. The record further shows that a unit commendation was submitted by General Tatum at that time, citing Major Voss by name, which was held in suspension due to the personnel classification question. That commendation is now being processed for formal entry. The room was very quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when information is landing and rearranging things. Mara did not look at Fick. She looked at Okafor. With respect to the institutional review currently underway at this facility, Okafor continued, the Joint Medical Review Authority's position is that the restriction of OR privileges applied to Dr. Voss was inconsistent with her documented qualifications, and that the emergency procedures she performed on General Tatum were within her demonstrated competency, irrespective of the facility's internal credentialing status. She closed the folder. We are recommending immediate full reinstatement of privileges and formal closure of the unauthorized procedure investigation, with a notation that the emergency exception criteria were met. Fick cleared his throat. Everyone looked at him. He said, I want to be clear that the privilege restriction was applied according to standard protocol and was not, Dr. Fick? Vance's voice was not loud. It was precisely calibrated to fill the room without elevation. General Tatum's statement includes his account of the circumstances in the trauma bay on the night of his arrival, specifically the decision made by the senior physicians present at that time. She paused. That account is now part of the military oversight record. Fick went still. Sloan, 2 seats away, stopped looking at the projection screen. The account describes, Vance said, still in the same measured tone, a situation in which 2 senior physicians declined to operate on a critically injured patient, citing, among other factors, concern about institutional reputation and the personal risk to their professional records in the event of an adverse outcome. She held Fick's gaze. The Joint Medical Review Authority will be conducting a separate inquiry into those decisions. Major Okafor will be leading it. Okafor looked up from her folder for the first time. She looked at Fick, and then at Sloan, and then back to her folder, and the brevity of that look was somehow more significant than a longer one would have been. Fick's composure, which Mara had watched him maintain for 8 months, through every variety of institutional weather, developed, for the first time, a visible crack. It was small, a tightening around the jaw, a single blink that lasted a half-second too long, but in a room full of people who knew how to read controlled behavior, it was audible. He said. The decisions made that night were based on a clinical assessment of the risk profile. The clinical assessment, Kfer said, without looking up, will be part of the inquiry. Silence, the kind that follows a door closing. Mara looked at her hands on the table. She was aware of the shape of the moment, the particular topology of a situation where the account you've been managing is no longer the only account in the room, where the record you built around yourself has been replaced by a different record, one you didn't write and can't revise. She had been in rooms like this before. Not often. Enough. She did not feel satisfied. She was aware that she probably should, and that the absence of satisfaction was itself a kind of information about how she'd spent the last 4 years and the 8 months before that. The meeting ran for 50 more minutes. Most of it was procedural, the mechanics of reinstating privileges, the documentation requirements for the investigation closure, the formal enrollment of Tatum's statement into the hospital record. Mara answered the questions she was asked directly and without elaboration, which she suspected frustrated some people and impressed others, and which she did not adjust in either direction. When the meeting ended, people left the room in the way people leave rooms, after things have happened, not quickly, not slowly, but with the particular careful pace of people processing information while pretending to do something ordinary. Sloan left without looking at her. Fick gathered his folder and stood, and for a moment he looked down the table at Mara with the expression of a man who has been calculating something for too long and has arrived at an answer he doesn't like. Then he said in a voice too low for most of the room to hear, "I'd like to speak with you." "When you have a moment," she said. "I'll find you later today." He nodded. He left. Okafor paused beside Mara on her way out. She was perhaps 40, with the look of someone who had seen a number of institutional disasters and had developed a professional patience around them. Dr. Voss. For what it's worth, the record from the 14th is the kind of record that doesn't leave much room for the kind of assessment you were getting here. Thank you. The inquiry into the senior physician's conduct will take approximately 6 weeks. I'll need a statement from you at some point, your account of what happened in the trauma bay. Not today, whenever you need it. Okafor nodded and left. Decker, on his way past, caught her eye and gave her a look that communicated, in the compressed shorthand of someone who didn't make speeches, something like "I knew it, and also I'm glad." She looked back at him and said nothing, which he seemed to understand. Vance was the last to leave. She stopped at the door. "Your privileges are reinstated as of this meeting. It'll be formally documented by end of day." She paused. "Tatum is asking if you'll come by this afternoon. I'll go when the meeting documentation is filed." Vance studied her for a moment. "You wrote up your account this morning?" "Yes, I'll need a copy." Mara produced the envelope from her jacket pocket and held it out. Vance took it. "You were ready." "I've had 4 years to think about what happens when this comes out," Mara said. "I didn't know the specific form, but I was ready for the general shape." Vance pocketed the envelope. She looked at Mara with an expression that was close to the almost smile from 2 nights ago, still not arriving, but present in intention. "The 14th produced good surgeons," she said. Then she left. Mara sat alone in the conference room for 4 minutes. She was aware of this, because the clock on the wall was loud in the absence of other noise, and she counted the seconds without meaning to, the way you count things when your mind is doing something at a level that doesn't announce itself. Then she stood up and went back to work. The afternoon had the quality of a weather system that has passed the air changed, the light different, the same landscape rearranged by what had moved through it. She did rounds on her active cases, all of which had continued their ordinary clinical progressions while everything else was happening, which was the reliable indifference of medicine that she had always found grounding. A post-op spinal case was progressing well. An elderly patient with a subdural she'd been monitoring conservatively had stable repeat imaging. A 34-year-old woman 2 days out from a tumor resection was sitting up and asking when she could eat something that wasn't gelatin. Soon, Mara told her. How soon is soon? Tomorrow, if your nausea stays where it is. The woman made a face. My husband brought me empanadas. They're sitting in the refrigerator in the family lounge. They'll still be there tomorrow. They won't. My brother-in-law is also there. Mara almost smiled. I'll put it in the chart. She went to see Fick at 4:15. His office looked the same as it had that morning, which was unremarkable except that the morning felt further away than 12 hours. The parking structure was doing what parking structures do in the late afternoon, filling with the vehicles of the day shift going home, which was ordinary, which was the kind of ordinary that had a different texture now than it had yesterday. Fick was behind his desk. He stood when she came in, which he hadn't done before, and gestured at the chair across from him. She sat, he sat. He looked at his hands for a moment. It was not a long moment, but it was deliberate, the look of someone choosing how to start something. They have decided to start honestly rather than strategically. She gave him the space to do it. The inquiry is going to find what it finds, he said. I'm not going to tell you I'm not concerned about that, because I am, and I don't think you'd believe me if I said otherwise. He looked up. But I want to say something before it runs its course, while I'm the one choosing to say it rather than being positioned to. She waited. I declined that case because I was afraid of the outcome, he said. Not in those words, not even consciously. Exactly, I ran it as a clinical assessment, and I believed it was a clinical assessment. But Vance is right that there was an institutional component. What it would mean for this hospital if a 4-star died on our table. What it would mean for my record. He paused. I've been telling myself for 30 years that I make decisions based on the medicine. That's not what I did that night. Mara looked at him. He was not a bad man. She had understood this for some time, and it hadn't made the 8 months easier, because bad and good men with corrupted judgment produced the same outcomes from the patient's end. I know, she said. I misjudged you, he said, from the first week. I decided what you were before I looked at you correctly, and once I'd decided, I found reasons to keep deciding it. He met her eyes. I'm telling you this because it's true, not because I need it to mitigate anything in the inquiry. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what she wanted to say, not the diplomatic version, the version that closed distances without crossing them, but the real one. Respect is a behavior, she said, not a conclusion you arrive at after the fact. He held her gaze. He didn't flinch from it. Yes, he said. That's right, she stood. The inquiry is going to find what it finds. If you give an honest account, that's all you can do. She paused at the door. You should know that Tatum's son is flying in from the East Coast. He'll be here by tomorrow morning. I mention it because when he arrives and when he talks to his father, you're going to want the record to already reflect that you said this to me today. She left before he could respond. She was in the hallway pulling out her phone to check Tatum's afternoon readings when she nearly walked into Sloan. He was coming from the direction of the elevator. He had his coat on, which meant he'd been outside, or was planning to be, and he stopped when he saw her with the expression of a man who has been deciding something and has decided it on a timeline that reality has now imposed upon him. I've submitted a statement to Okafor, he said, voluntarily, before she scheduled the interview. Mara said nothing. I told her that my recommendation against operating was informed by institutional risk assessment, rather than a pure clinical evaluation. He said it with the precision of someone who had chosen every word carefully. I told her I should have operated. The hallway was busy around them in the ordinary way of a hospital at shift change, people moving past, carts, noise, the ambient life of the institution continuing its work. It was a strange setting for what was happening in the 2 feet between them, but it was the setting they had. What made you decide to submit voluntarily? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. My account was going to come out anyway. The inquiry would have gotten there. He paused. But I've been thinking about what it would mean to wait, to be pulled toward honesty by an institutional process rather than walking toward it on my own. He looked at her. I've been doing medicine for 19 years. I'd like to be able to say I can still do this part honestly. She studied him. He was not performing. She was reasonably good at distinguishing performance from the real thing it was, a skill she'd developed in contexts considerably higher stakes than a hospital hallway, and what she saw in Sloane's face right now was a man doing something hard because he'd decided it needed to be done. That was not the same as being good. It was not the same as what he'd taken from her over the last 8 months. But it was not nothing, and she was not going to pretend it was nothing, because she was angry. The inquiry will reflect that, she said. He nodded. He seemed about to say something more, then reconsidered, and went past her toward the elevator. She watched him go. She had expected some version of this moment to feel larger than it did. She had carried the weight of Calloway for 8 months, the dismissals, the restricted privileges, the specific daily erosion of being treated like someone provisional, and she'd assumed that the correction of it would land with corresponding force. It didn't. It landed quietly, like a weight being set down, not like a door slamming. She was not sure what that said about her. She thought about it while she walked to the ICU. Tatum was more awake than the afternoon, more himself, and his son Keller had arrived early, not tomorrow morning, but this evening, the red-eye from Virginia expedited by military channels. He was sitting in the chair beside his father's bed when Mara came to the window, and he was 26 now. She registered that 26, which meant he had been 22 when she'd last seen him, in circumstances that were not clinical, in a forward position that no longer existed. He saw her through the glass before she'd decided whether to go in. He stood up. He came to the door of the room and opened it and stood in the doorway and looked at her with the expression of someone who has been told something and is now seeing the evidence of it and finding that the evidence does not reduce the thing, makes it larger. He was taller than she remembered. His left shoulder still sat slightly lower than the right, the remnant of the wound, the way it had healed. He said, "My dad told me." His voice was lower than it used to be. He had been a boy, and now he was not. He told me who operated on him. Mara held his gaze. "How's the shoulder?" He blinked. Then something broke open in his expression, not tears. But adjacent to them, the precursor state someone who has been holding something together for a very long time because they didn't know they had permission to put it down. "Full range of motion," he said. "Took 14 months. But full range." "Good," she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he stepped back and held the door open. "He wants to see you." She went in. Tatum looked better than this morning, more present, more organized, the sedation further away, and the man closer to the surface. There were still tubes, still monitors, still the evidence of what he'd been through visible in his face and his careful stillness, but the eyes that found her when she came to the foot of the bed were the eyes of a general, and she understood, without it being stated, that this was how he'd wanted to be seen when he said what he was going to say. "Sit down," he said. She sat in the chair Keller had vacated. "The commendation," Tatum said. "From the 14th. I've asked Okafor's office to process it as active rather than historical. There's a distinction. Historical means it goes in the archive. Active means it goes through the ceremony." She said, "That's not necessary." "I know it isn't necessary." His voice was still rough, but it carried the weight it was intended to carry. "It's accurate. There's a difference." She looked at him. She thought about arguing. She thought about the specific way she had rebuilt her life without this, without the rank and the ceremony, and the institutional recognition of what the 14th had been, and she thought about how much of that rebuilding had been deliberate choice and how much had been protection. "All right," she said. He nodded. He looked tired in the way of someone who has spent significant energy on something important and is satisfied with the expenditure. "How's my brain?" "Doing better than it has any right to. I've been told that about myself before. The ICP is within acceptable range. The delayed hemorrhage site is closed. You're going to need follow-up imaging at 2 weeks and 6 weeks, and I'd recommend limiting high cognitive demand activity for 30 days, which I know is going to be impossible," he said. "I was going to say challenging. You were going to say impossible." She'd looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I was." He made a sound that was close to a laugh and decided not to be one, probably because laughing would have been uncomfortable. "I'll do the 30 days," he said. "Keller will enforce it." "Good," she stood. "I'll check your morning readings before rounds." "Voss." He said it the way he'd said it through the sedation, her name, exact. The cadence of someone who had known it for a long time. She stopped. "What happens next for you here?" "The investigation closed." She thought about it. "I go back to work. With full privileges." "With full privileges." He looked at her for a moment. "That's not enough," he said. "For what they did to you for 8 months. Restricted privileges. Sideline, that's not a situation that gets corrected by going back to normal. I know, she met his eyes. But that's an argument for tomorrow. Tonight I'm going to check your numbers, drink something warm, and sleep more than 4 hours. Tomorrow, then. She left. In the corridor outside the ICU, she stood for a moment with her hands in her coat pockets and the sounds of the evening hospital around her. She thought about what Tatum had said, that's not enough, and she agreed with him, and she knew the argument for tomorrow was going to be more complex than what had happened today, because today had been the exposure of a truth, and what came after the exposure was always more complicated than the exposure itself. She was aware, standing in that hallway, that she was about to walk back into a hospital that no longer knew what to do with what it understood about her. Fick was sitting with an inquiry and an honest conversation he hadn't wanted to have. Sloan had walked towards something he could have avoided. The residents and nurses who had watched her get sidelined for 8 months were now in the process of recalibrating everything they'd been shown by the people above them. The institution itself was doing the slow, uncomfortable work of seeing itself. She was also aware, and this was the part she hadn't fully anticipated, that what she'd said to Tatum was true. She was going to check his numbers, drink something warm, and sleep. Not because she wasn't angry, and not because she had somehow arrived at a place of completion, but because the work had not stopped. It had never stopped. It wasn't going to stop tomorrow. She had been doing this since the 14th. She was going to keep doing it. She pulled out her phone to check the evening readings and found instead a message from a number she didn't recognize, a Harmon area code. Brief, formal. Dr. Voss. This is General Tatum's military staff coordinator, at the general's request. He's asked me to forward you something ahead of the formal processing. Please open the attached. She opened the attachment. It was a scan of a document. Handwritten in the margin, in ink that had faded to the brown of something kept for years, were 2 lines in a hand she didn't recognize. Below the lines was a signature. Below the signature was a date, 4 years ago. The 2 lines read. She held the line when everyone else couldn't. Some debts don't get smaller with time. The signature was Tatum's. Below the citation block, in the formal language of military commendation, her name appeared, her full name, her rank, every action of those 6 hours itemized in the compressed, factual prose of official documentation. She read it once. Then she put her phone in her pocket and walked down the corridor toward the nurse's station, where Marcus Pohl was annotating a chart, and looked up when she appeared, and she said, "How are my post-op readings from this afternoon?" He pulled up the tablet. Spinal case is stable. Tumor resection patient's nausea is improving. The conservative subdural you've been watching had a small uptick this morning, but it's been consistent since noon. Want imaging on the subdural in the morning, early before the surgical schedule starts. I'll put in the order. Good. She took the tablet and started reading. Pohl watched her for a moment the way he'd been watching her since the OR 2 nights ago, with the attention of someone recalibrating what they're looking at, and then he went back to his own chart, and they worked in the efficient near silence of 2 people who had found a rhythm, and the evening hospital moved around them. At 9:15 p.m. her phone buzzed again. Vance this time. A message, not a call. Okafor's preliminary findings have been shared with the executive committee. Fick's administrative authority is being reviewed, effective immediately. Formal determination expected within the inquiry timeline. You should know before morning. She read it. She set the phone down. Then it buzzed again. A second message from Vance. Shorter. Also, Sloan's voluntary statement included something you should be prepared for. He didn't just describe what happened in the trauma bay. He described a pattern. Credentialing delays, case removals, the privilege restriction process. He has documentation going back 6 months. Mara looked at the message for a long moment. Sloan had documentation, which meant that what Okafor's inquiry was going to find was not a single bad night in a trauma bay. It was a 6-month institutional pattern of decisions made by 2 senior physicians that had systematically prevented a combat-decorated surgeon from practicing at the level her qualifications warranted. It was not a mistake. It was a structure. And structures, when documented, became a different kind of problem than moments did. She understood why Sloan had submitted voluntarily. He had seen the structure before the inquiry did, and he had understood what the inquiry was going to do with it when it arrived there on its own. That the difference between, I told you, and we found it was the difference between a man doing something difficult and a man being caught. She also understood that his documentation, while it served his own purposes, was accurate. That it was accurate mattered. Whatever his reasons, the record it would produce was a true one. She put the phone in her pocket. She finished her evening rounds. She checked Tatum's numbers herself before she left the floor, stable, steady, the readings of a man who had been brought back twice, and was holding. She stood at his window for a moment in the dim evening quiet of the ICU. She was tired in the deep way that accumulates over days of inadequate sleep and sustained pressure. The kind of tired that doesn't resolve with one night, but that she knew, from experience, she could function inside. She had functioned inside worse. She took the elevator to the 4th floor. She was going to the on-call room. She was going to set an alarm for 500. She was going to sleep. The elevator opened on the 4th floor and she stepped out, and the first thing she saw, standing in the hallway outside the on-call rooms with the expression of a man who had been waiting, and was now very carefully not looking like he'd been waiting, was Roland Fick. He had something in his hand, a folder. He held it out when she got close enough. She took it. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet, not a form, not an official document. A letter, typed, signed, the date this morning. She read it. She read it twice. It was a formal recommendation. From Fick to the hospital's executive committee, submitted before the 1,500 meeting, before Okafor's findings, before Vance's messages, before any of the machinery of accountability had arrived at the outcome it was arriving at. It was a recommendation for her appointment to full attending status, surgical department, with expanded trauma privileges, and a seat on the credentialing review board. She looked up at him. "I wrote it this morning," he said, "before the meeting. I want you to know the timing." She looked back at the letter. She understood what he was telling her, that this was not a response to consequences, that it had preceded the consequences by 6 hours, that whatever he was trying to draw that line. She understood it, and she was not sure yet what to do with the understanding. "This doesn't resolve the 6 months," she said. "No," he said. "It doesn't. Sloane's documentation is going to show the full pattern. Okafor is going to find it regardless of this letter." "I know." She looked at him. He looked back. He was not asking for something that was the thing she had to acknowledge. Looking at him, he was not holding out the letter in trade. He was holding it out because he had written it and he thought she should have it, and he had waited in a hallway to give it to her in person rather than send it through the administrative channel where it was already filed, because in person meant something different. "The inquiry will find what it finds," she said finally. "Yes. And I will give my account when Okafor asks for it, and my account is going to be accurate. I would expect nothing else." She closed the folder. She looked at him one more time. Then she said, "Good night, Dr. Fick." She walked past him to the on-call room. She heard him standing there in the hallway for a moment. Then she heard him walk toward the elevator. She closed the on-call room door. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the dark and held the folder and thought about 6 months of cases she hadn't been allowed to lead, of privilege reviews marked ongoing, of every small decision that had accumulated into the structure Sloane had apparently been documenting since February. She thought about the commendation in her phone, faded ink and a date 4 years gone. She thought about Tatum calling her rank through sedation 11 times, in the language of a debt that hadn't shrunk. She set the folder on the side table. She set her alarm. She lay back on the narrow mattress and closed her eyes. And in the thin space between waking and sleep, something arrived that she hadn't been expecting, not the relief she'd anticipated, not the satisfaction that hadn't come in the conference room. Something quieter, something that felt less like an ending and more like the particular stillness that precedes a beginning. She was still in this hospital. She was going to be in it tomorrow. And in 3 days, when the inquiry's preliminary findings were formalized and distributed to the executive committee, and when the committee sat with Sloane's documentation and Okafor's analysis and Fick's letter and the military record that was now unsealed and entered into the institutional file in 3 days, someone was going to knock on a door she hadn't been told was going to be knocked on, and behind it was going to be something she had not, in 4 years of rebuilding, allowed herself to imagine. Her phone buzzed once more. She looked at it in the dark. Vance. Final message of the night. The formal commendation ceremony has been scheduled. 2 weeks. Tatum's insisting on being ambulatory for it. His physical therapy team is not pleased. Then a second later, one more thing. Okafor asked me to tell you directly the inquiry scope has been expanded. It's no longer just Callaway. She's requesting records from the 3 facilities you applied to before this one. Mara stared at the ceiling, the 3 facilities before Callaway. The applications that had not resulted in positions, for reasons she had not been given in terms clear enough to dispute. The pattern she had assumed was about her age, her profile, the specific way she read on paper, without the context of what the 14th had been. The 3 facilities before Callaway. She sat up. She sat in the dark on the edge of the on-call room bed, fully awake now, and she thought about who had known before Callaway that she was applying. who had access to her application records, who had been part of the professional network that processed her credentials through civilian medical channels before she arrived here. And she thought about the name at the top of one of those applications reference lists, a name she had not thought about in connection with any of this, because she had not had reason to, until right now, in the dark, with Okafor's expanded scope in her hand. The name was Garrett Sloan,